The champagne on the nightstand had gone flat, just like the promises whispered at the altar hours ago. My new husband stood silhouetted against the moonlit window, his back to me, murmuring figures and forecasts into his phone. The words that drifted across the room weren't whispers of love, but the cold, hard language of a boardroom. He spoke of leveraging assets and streamlining our heritage brands. It was then I understood with sickening clarity. This marriage wasn't a merger of two hearts, but a hostile takeover of one. I wasn't his partner, I was the most valuable asset he had just acquired. And the cruelest cut of all wasn't his treachery, but the chilling realization that my own family had willingly placed the keys to our kingdom, and to my life, directly into his hands. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together. From every corner of the world, your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here, if you haven't already. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Meredith Sterling, and my life, as I knew it, felt like a dream woven from sunlight and grapevines, one of those you are terrified to wake up from. I was about to marry Leo Vance, the man I had pictured for years as my partner, my safest haven. Our wedding day unfolded under the ancient oaks of Sterling Vineyards, a place where the Napa soil held more stories than any history book. And I was convinced our love was as deep and timeless as the roots that fed our award-winning vines. Everything was prepared with meticulous care that bordered on obsession. The flowers, cascading white roses that mirrored the ones my grandmother planted decades ago. The menu crafted to pair perfectly with our rarest vintages. The string quartet playing a melody that held a secret meaning only Leo and I understood. My mother cried quiet tears of joy as I looked at myself in the mirror, dressed in a gown that felt like spun moonlight, believing with every fiber of my being that I had finally found a happiness as pure and true as our wine. What I didn't know was that this wedding, this supposed union of two hearts, was the beginning of my greatest tragedy. From the start, I couldn't imagine walking down the aisle without my best friend, Chloe, by my side. She was my soul sister, my confidant, the keeper of secrets I'd never uttered to anyone else. We had grown up together among these vines, sharing scraped knees and whispered dreams under the moonlit leaves. That's why I chose her as my maid of honor without a second thought. She smiled with a familiar tenderness as she helped me with my veil, her fingers deftly adjusting the delicate lace. "Perfect," she whispered, her eyes meeting mine in the mirror. Just perfect. I didn't know that behind her sweet, familiar eyes, a dark and devastating secret was hiding, one that would soon destroy my world from the inside out. The estate was magical, a stately stone manor surrounded by blooming gardens, the perfect place to start a new life. The night before, we all had dinner together on the patio, lit by string lights. The air smelled of jasmine and damp earth. Leo seemed calm, even more affectionate than usual, his hand resting on the small of my back as he introduced me to a distant cousin. Chloe never left my side, topping up my wine, laughing at my jokes with a warmth that felt like a comforting blanket. I saw them exchange a brief, knowing glance at one point, and I had simply assumed it was a look of shared happiness for me. How naive I was. The next morning, Chloe was the first to enter my room, bringing a tray with breakfast and a smile that I now remember as a cruel, perfectly rehearsed mask. "The most beautiful bride in the world," she'd said, and I had believed her. When the time came, my father took my arm at the top of the garden path, his hand warm and steady on mine. He squeezed it gently. "You deserve all the happiness in the world, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. I saw our entire history in his eyes, every scraped knee he'd bandaged, every school play he'd attended. Leo was waiting at the end of the aisle, his eyes glistening in the California sun. I walked toward him, my own eyes blurring with tears, convinced I was taking the most beautiful and important step of my life. I saw our future stretching out before us, filled with laughter, children, and the shared responsibility of our family legacy. During our vows, he took my hands in his, and his felt strong and sure. He promised to be my partner, my confidant, and my greatest champion. When the officiant asked if we accepted to join our lives, my voice was shaky but firm as I said, "I do." My gaze locked on Leo's. He also said, "I do," with a brilliant smile, though I thought I saw his expression dim for a fleeting moment. A shadow passing over his face so quickly I was sure I had imagined it. I dismissed it as nerves. We kissed to the sound of applause, and in that instant, I believed our love was real and unbreakable. The celebration was intimate and elegant. Leo moved between the guests, a glass of champagne in hand, laughing and charming everyone. But as the evening wore on, I noticed something distant in the way he looked at me. When our eyes met across the crowded room, his gaze seemed to slide past me, as if looking at something far more interesting just over my shoulder. When I joined him, he would wrap an arm around me, but it felt like a performance for the crowd, a gesture lacking any real warmth. My father stood to toast our union, his speech filled with touching anecdotes of my childhood. Everyone applauded warmly. Leo raised his glass, but the smile he wore was a polite facade, one that didn't quite reach his eyes. I told myself I was being overly sensitive, that the stress of the day was making me imagine things. But deep down, a tiny cold fissure was forming in the foundation of my happiness. After the party, we went up to the bridal suite. The air was thick with the scent of roses and lilies. My heart pounded with a mix of excitement and nerves. I closed the door softly, believing we were about to seal our story with love. Leo placed his watch on the nightstand with a definitive click, took off his shoes without looking at me, and sighed heavily. A sigh not of contentment, but of exhaustion, as if he had just completed a tiresome task. I went to hug him, to feel his arms around me, and that's when he spoke. "I'm tired," he said, his tone dry, flat, as if he were discussing the weather with a stranger. I stood frozen, the words hanging in the air between us like icicles. His face was a mask of indifference, completely devoid of emotion. He turned his back to me, unbuttoned his shirt, and went straight to the small twin bed tucked away in a corner of the room. He didn't say goodnight. He just turned off his lamp, plunging his side of the room into a darkness that felt colder than ice, leaving the suite in a silence that hurt more than any yell. I sat on the edge of our magnificent marriage bed, feeling utterly invisible on the most important night of my life. I waited for what felt like an eternity for an explanation, a word, anything. But all I got was the sound of his quiet, even breathing. I slowly lay down, my gown feeling like a suit of armor, trying not to make a sound as silent. Hot tears streamed down my face. The room smelled of fresh flowers, but inside my chest, everything was withering. That is how I spent my first night as a wife alone, confused and with a broken soul. I must have drifted into a restless, shallow sleep, only to be jolted awake by a muffled sound. I sat up, my heart racing, disoriented. Leo's bed was empty. I slowly got up, my bare feet silent on the cold floor, and crept to the door. I heard the sound again, a short, stifled groan, as if someone was trying to suppress a sound of pleasure. The hallway was dark, and the sound was coming from the room at the end, my mother-in-law's room, which was supposed to be empty. My mind began to piece together the impossible. What was Leo doing in there? I moved down the hallway, a cold sweat running down my back. Each step felt heavy, as if I were wading through mud. Something inside me started connecting loose details. I had ignored looks that hadn't seemed important. A shared glance between him and Chloe during the toast. My soul had a premonition it was about to shatter. I stopped in front of the door, my hands shaking uncontrollably, and pressed my ear to the cool wood. A soft creak of the bed, a muffled sigh, and then a woman's voice. I recognized it instantly. It was Chloe, her voice, the one that had comforted me 1,000 times, was now whispering broken words of pleasure. I felt a sharp, physical blow to my chest, as if the air had been knocked from my lungs. All our secrets, our promises of loyalty, came crashing down. Then I heard his voice. Leo's deep, unmistakable voice whispering Chloe's name. The ground disappeared from under my feet. It was my husband, the man who had promised me eternal love just hours ago, sharing a bed with my best friend. The tears came, hot and bitter. But I didn't make a sound. I rested my forehead against the cold wall, my body shaking. I decided to stay there, to wait for them to come out, to see their faces. Time became an agonizing torture. Then, the door opened suddenly. Leo came out, his shirt unbuttoned, freezing when he saw me standing there, guilt etched on his face. Then she appeared from behind him, her hair disheveled, her makeup smeared. When she saw me, she froze, unable to hold my gaze. The image of them together spoke louder than 1,000 words. And still, I dared to ask, why? I stood in front of them, blocking their path, my voice broken by a storm of anger and pain. Leo didn't know where to look. He raised his voice nervously, telling me I was wrong, that he was just helping her with something. The lie was so clumsy, so insulting in its simplicity, that it momentarily eclipsed the pain of the betrayal itself. Chloe just looked down, silent. I told him I had heard everything. His shoulders dropped, and he finally admitted it in a low voice. He didn't apologize. He just said he had been confused for a while. At his confession, Chloe burst into tears, repeating that she was sorry. Her crying didn't move me. It was too late for regrets. The person I had trusted most in the world had stabbed me in the back. I felt something inside me break into a million pieces. There were no tears left, only a mute, dry rage. I turned, went back to the bridal suite, gathered my things, and walked down the stairs, my beautiful white gown still on. No one followed me. I walked across the garden barefoot, wanting only to get away, to breathe air that didn't smell of their lies. I left without a goodbye, with a broken heart but my dignity intact. I walked for hours down empty country roads, my dress dragging in the dirt. When the sky began to lighten, exhaustion guided me back to the estate. It was quiet, as if nothing had happened. I entered through the back door, feeling like an intruder in the place that was supposed to be my home. The dining room was filled with the soft voices of our guests enjoying breakfast. Oblivious to the drama that had unfolded, I stood in the doorway, feeling a cold anger grow at the normalcy. No one had even seemed to notice my absence. I took a deep breath, walked in, and asked for their attention. With a firm voice, calmer than I felt, I asked everyone to gather in the main living room. My parents looked at me with deep unease. Leo and Chloe were nowhere to be seen. Their absence confirmed everything. I thanked everyone for being there, and then, without hesitation, I told them the truth. I said I had discovered Leo and Chloe together in his mother's room on my wedding night. A wave of shocked murmurs filled the room, but my voice didn't break. For the first time in hours, I was in control. Silence fell. My mother covered her mouth. My in-laws looked down in shame with a clear voice. I announced my intention to annul the marriage and that I wanted nothing to do with either of them ever again. I didn't want pity, just respect for my decision. My father wrapped me in a silent, firm hug. As I left the room, I felt like I was leaving behind an entire version of myself that no longer existed. I left the estate and never looked back. That part of my life was dead. I contacted a lawyer and filed for an annulment based on fraud. The legal process was swift and decisive. I was not the same woman who had said "I do" at that altar. Weeks later, I heard Leo had moved in with Chloe. They paraded their relationship around town as if it were a prize they had won. But a love built on betrayal didn't take long to rot. A few months later, rumors began to circulate about their constant arguments, yells that the neighbors could hear through the walls. What started as a forbidden passion turned into routine distrust and blame. One day, Leo disappeared from their apartment, leaving Chloe with only a note. He had cheated on her with a younger woman. He had repeated his pattern. Chloe was left alone, devastated, and she finally understood what it means to be completely abandoned. I, on the other hand, threw myself into my work, rebuilding myself from within. The first few months were a blur of sleepless nights and numb days. But slowly, I channeled my pain into purpose. I invested in myself, in my business, and gradually, the sadness gave way to clarity. I discovered a happiness that didn't depend on anyone else. Over the next few years, my small business grew into a respected brand. The independence I had always dreamed of was something I was building with my own hands, and no one could take that away from me. My life was different, serene, solid. It no longer hurt to remember that night. It only reminded me of how far I had come. And just when I wasn't looking for it, I met him. His name was Daniel Jackson. He was a fellow entrepreneur with a quiet confidence that was captivating. He didn't try to impress me. He listened. With him, I didn't feel butterflies. I felt peace. With Daniel, everything was different. There were no empty promises, just sincere conversations and mutual respect. He was patient and steadfast. With him, I learned to trust again, not because he asked me to, but because his actions made it safe to do so. I was no longer the woman who survived. I was the woman who lived. Somehow, Leo found out I was with someone and sent me a message full of feigned nostalgia. He said he was happy for me, but I could sense the bitterness of someone who can't stand to see the person they thought they destroyed find happiness. I didn't respond. I owed him nothing. One afternoon, he showed up at my store looking thinner, his eyes dull. He said he needed closure, that he had made a terrible mistake. I listened without emotion, like someone watching rain from behind a window. When he finished, I looked at him firmly. "You no longer have any power over me." I told him, "We don't exist. There is no room for you in my life." There was no yelling, just a cold, final refusal. He tried to smile, but he just seemed small and irrelevant. I asked him to leave, and I closed the door on our past forever. When silence returned, I didn't feel triumph, just a deep sense of calm. Daniel came in a few minutes later and, seeing my face, simply hugged me without a word. He didn't need an explanation. He just offered his unconditional support. I looked at him and knew that life, with all its wounds, had brought me to him. By his side, I felt at home. The ruins of what I once was became the foundation to rebuild myself, firmer and freer than before. I learned that anyone who survives such a deep betrayal is reborn. My happy ending didn't come from another person, it came from me. I learned that the strongest love is the one you have for yourself. Everything else is a complement, never the center. Today, my life is peaceful, bright, and full. And I finally understand that true love doesn't come when you expect it. It comes when you finally choose yourself. The story we've shared is a powerful reminder that sometimes our greatest growth comes from our deepest wounds. It teaches us that the end of a dream is not the end of the world, but often the painful, necessary birth of our true selves. In the quiet aftermath of heartbreak, we are given a rare opportunity to rebuild our lives on a foundation that no one can ever shake: our own self-worth. We learn that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how we rise, not with bitterness, but with a quiet dignity that becomes our shield. It is in choosing ourselves, again and again, that we find a peace that no person can give and no circumstance can take away. The greatest love doesn't arrive like a storm to save us. It feels like sunshine, warming a house that is already built, a soul that is already whole. Thank you for being here and for sharing in this journey with us. Every story connects us in our shared human experience, and we would be honored to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What does resilience mean to you? Your perspective is what makes this community so special. If you found meaning in this story, please consider subscribing and turning on notifications so you never miss another tale of strength, healing, and the incredible power of the human heart.